All right, welcome. We've got an exciting 45 minutes, probably one of the best groups of CEOs I think we've ever had ever sit here at the PTC in one room at one table, and I'm very, very excited to have a very, very interesting debate. The irony is that some of actually the guys that went before actually own some of these assets, so we'll have to compare notes as we go through to see whether the CEOs give the same answers that the investors did. But what I'd like to do is just start off. I mean, one of the things that we talked about with the investors and one of the things that we mentioned in the opening was, are we in a situation right now where we think we're about to hit another growth cycle? You know, obviously there's a lot of key trends in the industry that everyone's talking about, whether it be artificial intelligence, machine learning, whether you start talking about cloud. But reality is also, if you start looking at some of the underlying economic situations, something like 50% of corporations right now are having debt problems, and so there is a bit of a debt crisis that may be looming, at least in North America, that could put some headwinds. And then obviously you have an election, which generally brings positive, economic news. So what do you guys think as you start looking around, and do you care, or do you think, and one of the questions, and just to give you some background, we talked to the investors, they talked about almost like a two-track environment where tech was going in sort of on its own trend, and then the world economy had its own view. I mean, so it'd be helpful to kind of get your thoughts. Maybe start with you, Randy. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think what you meant to say is the CEO panel will correct what the investor panel says, just for the record. So I think there's a couple things you asked in that. One is, how is the world economy and some of these tactical issues, elections and debt and so on, impacting things? And I actually think you got to the macro answer, which is tech, it impacts, let's not kid ourselves, but the impacts are not felt as deeply or as harsh as they are in many of the other industries. And some of that is the innovation that's happening. Some of that is parts of it aren't as capital intensive, right? There's just not there's servers and some assets there, but some of it isn't as bad as some of the other industries that are there. And frankly, some of those other industries are impacted by the very tech and innovation that's coming, which leads to the first half of what you talked about. Do we see growth drivers? Oh yeah. I'd say it is interesting to look at where we're at with cloud and obviously the beginning days of AI. And if I look at cloud, I'd say here in the States, if an enterprise isn't on cloud, it's behind. And I think you're actually seeing some need for folks to accelerate the workloads and the transition there. And you're up a little bit further behind, but coming up quickly as the industrial clouds have gotten stronger and stronger. And in Asia, it's still earlier innings, right? Now, the great news is with parts of Asia, we're seeing enterprises able to leapfrog again. Same type of thing that's happening. As for AI, there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of interesting views on it. There's obviously going to be some regulatory pressures. There's going to, we don't know how it's going to play out. But it has the potential to be, for some of us, the fourth or fifth foundational technology. Fortunately, most of us on this stage remember the PC era, when that one came. We certainly remember when the internet was introduced. We remember when mobile hit as a whole new ecosystem and set of companies that came. You could argue that hit timing-wise, interestingly, with cloud. I don't think that's completely independent. AI has the potential to be that kind of platform change. Now, it could be just something that's going to permeate every industry and every job function, or it could be another foundational platform, and therefore we're not even in a position today to talk about the companies and the innovation that's to come. Give it 3, 4, 5 years, and we'll be talking about companies none of us even thought about before.
Yeah, no, it's a... Dave, what do you think? I mean, as you start thinking about, obviously you're seeing it more from the fiber side of it, and where do you think we're on the edge of a growth opportunity here?
So in an industry where prices declined 23% per year for the past 30 years, it's hard to talk about economic growth. But the good news is bit volume outpaces that and has allowed the industry to continue to grow. I think I want to tie back to the first question you asked, Bill, and that is, how is tech and the rest of the economy tied together? And the reality is, for the first 25 years of the internet's life, it generated about 1% real GDP growth in the world. That's about half of the growth the world had came from innovation from the internet. I think AI has that same kind of capability. I think I agree with Randy's point that it'll probably permeate virtually every aspect of computing. And yes, we are old enough to remember actually the Mini, and then the PC, and then the land revolution, and then the internet, and now I think a new generation of computing. And AI is possible because the internet allowed the information necessary to train applications to be collected at a low enough cost value, basically zero cost, and we're now in the process of extracting value from that. For the network connectivity piece, is your direct question, that's foundational to making all of this work. Now, when the internet started, it started as an overlay network with no network of its own. It sat on top of Twisted Pair, coax, mobile, fixed wireless, or fiber, which is clearly better. And the world is undergoing a $1 trillion capital investment cycle to overbuild fiber everywhere. And the reality is a lot of people lose a lot of money in those fiber builds because what you're attempting to do is build the fourth or fifth network for the same application. Even though it's technologically superior, you have to dislodge those incumbent providers. And for most customers, they're complacent with what they have. They don't need cutting edge. So in deploying that capital, governments have forced private industry pretty much globally to do it, and it's created an overhang on our industry to the bad debt that you mentioned in a lot of companies.
Just an interesting question, because and I'll pose this to both Kerry and to Steve. When you look at fiber, right? So if you look at what happens, right now 5 companies essentially dominate. They make up 60% of the market capitalization of the United States. They're 5 tech companies, the 5 big boys, right? And reality is, I showed you a slide. Are we at the edge of a disaster? What happened in 2001? Well, what happened in 2001? All of a sudden, fiber essentially became free for everybody, right? I mean, the reality was you didn't have to pay for fiber. If you looked at the top 5 or 6 players, they all went into Chapter 11, and their assets were bought at 2 cents on the dollar, right? Or that was a good recovery at that time. But now you've got new companies. So take Colt or take Zayo, and like yourself, Cogent, you guys are building new fiber, okay? Does that work? Is it a viable model? And I mean, I know because the reality was most technology companies benefited from almost a 15-year period of free access to the internet. So are you seeing models where you think that the fiber is actually going to be a viable, I mean, from an investor perspective, most of those investors are playing in Andy's world, which is in the data center space, or in Randy's world. And there's a lot fewer players that actually are in the fiber space. What do you think, Steve? I mean, Steve is actually one of the few folks that's actually obviously a CEO of Equinix for 12 years. So he's been on both sides of the fence, and be interesting also to see what he thinks is harder or easier in this world.
I missed that other side of the fence. I should have called Dave early on when I first took this job and said, talk to me about the operational intensity. I agree with everything Dave said and Randy. And listen, I think for all of us, these things all go in cycles. We're going to have headwinds and tailwinds, and I think there's a good combination today, but the tailwinds, I think, outweigh it. I personally think that as we all prosecute our company's agendas, that you're going to see a blurring between cloud requirements and AI requirements. The data center companies are seeing they're ahead of it, and I think Dave and I and Kerry we're starting to see the front edge of the requirements coming at us for fiber. The government stimulus in the United States is a big push behind that. We participated in the first NTIA bids and won 10% of those, and it's helping us build routes all over the U.S. There's another program called BEAD that you're aware of that's $42 billion in the U.S. that's pushing fiber out to the rural areas, and it's going to have a lot of middle mile requirements, and probably 10-15% of that's going to be for Dave and our company and others in that space, and 10-15% of $42 billion is a big number. So we're paying attention to that. But listen, we do a lot of long haul routes, and since I arrived there, we've had a dozen going at any one time. They're complex, they're big, they take a long time, but they're driven by the most sophisticated requirements in the world. The customers of all of us, the hyperscalers and the Metas and the other companies. So listen, everybody's getting better at capital allocation. There's a little bit of visibility to scrutiny on capital allocation today with some of our peers in our industry. We're all watching that carefully as the activists kind of, get active. But it's all about capital allocation. And if you're paying attention and you're getting paybacks that are, acceptable, and you're getting upfront payments from some of these big customers that didn't used to do that, to go do what Dave and I got to do, it changes the dynamics and the economics.
Hey, Carrie, I mean, you have kind of a unique situation because I always find Europe was sort of the early days of they built the fiber on the railroads, and that actually was a pretty viable business model. So it's probably a little bit better than the United States. It always seems to feel a little bit better. What's your thoughts?
And what we're seeing in Europe and what rest of the world, for Colt, we kind of think of ourselves as not being the incumbent anywhere, but being the incumbent everywhere. And that just meaning that we're one of the providers that has consistently stayed in the global marketplace, and we continue to do so, whether that's Europe, Asia, or even coming back into the States and North America here, and having that capability. And I think one of the advantages we have had is that we've only played in the B2B space. So, when we think about number of homes passed, we think that is a very legacy metric that was misused. And, when you look at the metric and the dynamics of fiber, one of the biggest dynamics is, was build it and they will come. Yeah. And we saw that in Europe, we saw that in North America. We're just starting to see a transition in Europe from number of homes passed to number of homes served, and that actually being the metric that matters within the business. We at Colt never looked at it that way. We always built fiber based upon customer demand, and so I think it's made it so that we've stayed ahead of the revenue game, even if it's just a couple of percent year on year. Growing from that perspective. I do think AI changes the model, though. I think that the way that fiber infrastructure was built over the past 30 years is not the way that architectures will be required in the future. And I think you need more capillaries than we build a lot of veins, we build a lot of arteries, but now you need a lot of capillaries in order to actually get to the sources of data, whether that's large data centers or it's actually out on the edge where the distribution is more. And I think you're going to start to see a shift of value creation, not just in bandwidth and the capability of low latency and data sovereignty and security and some of those elements, but you actually are going to start to see more demand when it comes to sustainability. And we're starting to see that now. About 20% of the RFPs that we respond to, are weighting sustainability at a much higher level. And I think it's something we all have to be conscious of, because if you take 50, between 20 and 50 prompts within an AI, chat GPT, generative, AI large language model, that actually consumes 500 milliliters, 16 ounces of water in a data center. So, you can't just look at AI and say everything is the same and we can build in the same way, whether you're a data center creator or you're a fiber builder. We have to be smarter, and we have to take into consideration the environmental impact as well as the value creation.
I think it's a big issue, and that's actually a good segue to talk to Andy. I think, when you look around the world right now, and you talk to the big over-the-top players, I think they say that of the renewable energy, almost 70 or 80% of it's being used by data centers in Europe right now, right? It's some stat like that. It's phenomenal. And it's becoming it is becoming a big portion of the thought process, and communities are thinking about, okay, do I need, do I want one of these data centers in my community? It employs 3 to 10 people, and or maybe 15 people, depending on how big the data center gets. But then it also, at the same time, consumes a lot of electrical power. It consumes a lot of water. So Andy, what do you? I mean, because you obviously play at the top end of the space, and.
So I mean, a few things here. Just going back to the swirling of data centers versus fiber and the great debate here. I'm much more versed in the data center side of this, but for at least 20 years, it's been really tough to bet against it.
Yep.
Because you've had wave after wave of almost incremental demand, whether it is called the telecommunication firms to the off-prem, to the cloud, to AI, to now Gen AI, and some of these waves that even at the beginning haven't even come to shore, and they're building upon each other, and it's happening in a world where things have rapidly changed in the last several years, from a pandemic of office buildings no longer are what they used to be, people are moving to different cities, people are working in different ways, and all these things have to get strung together with technology at the heart of it, called driving top line and also being more efficient, which I think that goes back to, while we're seeing macroeconomic headwinds in a lot of corporate America or global, the tech industry and IT is not hitting the cutting room floor necessarily. All these waves of demand, in my opinion, are putting a strain on the key ingredients that goes into them. And you couple that with an economy that has been running hot for basically since the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Like so housing, industrial, sprinkle on a big investment in onshoring of plants and semis in the United States. And listen, I think people are waking up and saying, you know what, the natural resources are scarce. Like the power generation, transmission are changing these environments. And I don't think that's all bad, because I think it brings a much more disciplined approach to capital allocation, so we don't repeat the missteps that you might have seen previously. And I think sustainability is right there front and foremost. I can remember joining digital coming up in my 9th year, and that was not, even those that may have been mayors of big cities and had a big public-facing face on that. You wouldn't see that flow through organizations with that putting their mouth where the money where their mouth is on these topics. But today it's table stakes, which again I think is another thing that helps evolve and mature our industry in a more sustainable fashion. Yeah,
no, I think it's changing the role of the CEO in many ways to not only just being, okay, I've got to grow a business, it's got to be profitable, and I've got to have a long-term plan. But now you actually have to look at a lot of other variables. I think one of the things that's also interesting and we'll segue. Yesterday we had a bunch of the search firms were all kind of up on the stage talking about the challenges and actually just getting people, and getting qualified people into the industry. And I think that's because we've been running with zero unemployment and a lot of these, there's a concentration of our tech companies in 4 or 5 key certain geographies. What do you guys? What's in this new world? How do you deal with this? Because I think it's when you're growing at 20%, how do you get the workforce to do that? I mean, it's start with you, maybe Randy. I know you're in the
right.
DC, the metro. That area is that's hot too, right? I mean,
according to you, I only need 3 people. No.
Well, the fiber guys are always going to tell you that we need 20 guys to do what you guys do in 3.
My job's so
right?
hard compared to, I hear the fiber story. No. Look, the reality is we all need great engineering, tech, operations, even your traditional back office functions. I mean, there's a strain in almost every place. I think there's a few things going on that we have to deal with. First of all, we got to start looking to near neighbor industries. And there's a lot of former industrial things that work well. I was talking to somebody about oil and gas. I went out on an oil rig over Christmas holiday, and Want to talk about real engineering and real civil engineering. It's interesting, though. You start,
Remind me never to invite me to your Christmas holiday.
but it's interesting.
He has a lot of fun.
I do. So it's interesting, though. You start looking at all the there's a lot of near neighbor industries. I know in the data center space, a lot of us started working with companies, and even helped stand up companies like Salute and so on, where we tapped into the Veterans Network on a global basis. Talk about great operational training, right? Define the process, follow the process, execute in a consistent way. I know Andy's tapped into it. I know we kind of initiated some of that. Again, they weren't trained in data centers and stuff.
No, it's a great.
And then I think the third thing is, I know a number of us are starting to work with universities and other vocational programs to actually set up training in the data center space. We started by doing it at an HBCU. It started with one. I think we're up to like 12 now, Andy. Right. I think we're up to 12. We did it, and we got Microsoft and Google and others to join that party. And so now all of a sudden, you're kind of from all aspects, it's fantastic, right? You're able to get people that weren't traditionally into this field, and you're getting them training. And so their capstone projects, their senior projects, or their graduate projects are actually data center centric. Yep. So we have to create that workforce. We have to train that workforce, and then we have to reward that workforce. But I think people are starting to realize it's kind of sexy what we do. Like, it is the foundation of a lot of what's in the press today, right? You pick up the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, there's a darn good chance our companies may not be named, but what our companies do, what they drive, what they support are there. And so if you kind of show that linkage, it's, we can get it. Now, long way to go. It's hard, maybe real hard here in the US and in Europe. In Asia, we actually are finding a lot of people excited about joining this workforce.
What do you see, Steve? I mean, obviously you're on the fiber, and a little bit across the U.S., right? You got a pretty good snapshot of guys across the U.S. What are you seeing?
Oh, I think Randy's absolutely right, but you're poking at what I call culture. And I've always been a believer that if you want to attract top culture, you better have a company that has got a culture that people want to work with.
Yep.
And so I've always worked really hard, and we're doing it now at Zayo, that if you have a place where people enjoy working with each other, and they trust each other, and they trust their leaders, then you can create a great culture and a great place to work. And it's harder now, right? Since COVID, our workforce has got very diverse. They used to all be in Boulder and Denver. Now they're all over the place.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be the formula going forward. And I think you're going to have a hybrid formula that attracts the kind of people that you want to have. They're not only going to be in there 5 days a week. So you're going to have a mixture of how people work in the future. I think that decision has been made on our behalf by the world and our employees. So you just got to find that happy path that works. And I think culture, from my experience, can be a competitive differentiator if you do it right, on top of the other stuff you have in your toolkit.
So you feel like, just to digress a little bit, so you feel like the COVID world sort of changed things so that we're now in this hybrid world that everyone sort of works part-time at home and part-time. I mean, is that what you see, or is it, it's interesting because yesterday was pretty, when we talked to a bunch of companies yesterday, it was probably 70% of the companies have some sort of hybrid structure today where they work, 1 or 2 days at home and 3 days in the office. Is that sort of what we're seeing in the tech sector?
What we're seeing I would say post-COVID at Colts, what we did was we rolled out Flex First. And what that basically means is not one employee can work 100% remote, but everybody can work remotely kind of whenever they want. So we believe that the in-person moments matter, and that they do drive community, they do drive innovation, they do drive trust, and they are culture creators. So you have to spend more time and energy in actually facilitating those in-person moments. But I think the reality is the world has spoken, and if you want to walk down the floor of your headquarters and see people sitting in cubicles, that's just a false reality. And I think if we want to attract talent, I think you need both. At Colt, what we're seeing, and maybe it's because our headquarters is in London, and London's a super cool city, It is. And so the younger generation actually wants to be in the office. They actually want to come in, they want to build that community, they want to drive that learning, and that the in-person learning and environment is valuable to them. Where we're seeing people not wanting to be is where they have children. And so for me, it's more around phasing of the employee, from hire to retire. How do you actually deal with the environment that the employee needs, and how do you enable them to be successful along that hire to retire type of journey, depending on what stage in their personal life they're in. And so I think you have to just kind of shift your mind as to what work means and when work happens. And I think if you do that, then you can create a pretty exciting place.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I mean, there are, I think, many positives that came out of COVID, I think, in terms of just how we work and all this video technology that we'd all deployed for all these years, and all of a sudden it's you don't go into a single office where they don't see multiple screens, and so no, it has changed, I think, a lot. Let's think about what in the digital infrastructure space as we start thinking about artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence, I think, is probably there's two hot topics that have kind of come up in the last couple days, but one is artificial intelligence, and I'll get to the other one in a few minutes. But when we start thinking out into the next, 5 to 10 years, who do we see as the winners when we look at AI? Besides yourselves, okay, and obviously the data center guys, the fiber space, but where does it go? And are we the only beneficiaries, or will there be a lot of beneficiaries of AI?
I think the biggest beneficiary is going to be the consumer at the end of the day. Just like with the internet, many telecom service providers struggled with the fact that most of the value they created was dissipated to the consumer, making them more productive, whether it be their shopping experience or entertainment experience, giving them more for less. I think AI will be an extension of that dissemination of value. That doesn't mean certain companies won't be able to extract huge amounts of value from AI, but the real winner is society as a whole. I'll start with, I think the term AI probably is the wrong term today, because I think what people think in their mind is that some kind of cognitive intelligence is going to take over from people. And that will happen. Machines will think faster than people, but that's decades away. What we're doing now is really using the huge base of information that we collected at basically zero cost over the internet and doing pattern recognition out of those databases. That's what large language learning models are all about. That's why the heavy need for compute and data center space for that training phase. The next phase will be the inference phase, drawing conclusions from those patterns that we've recognized out of the data that we've all supplied. And whether it be in your car, whether it be how you watch your television, whether it be how you walk down the street, all of that data is what is being used as the raw material. AI, as we know it today, would not be possible without the internet and that low-cost amalgamation of data. So what is going to happen is those inference models will make everyone more efficient. It'll make companies more efficient in making their business decisions, but it'll make consumers more efficient. They won't have to search through thousands of items on Amazon to find what they're looking for. It'll be curated more for them. Their entertainment will be personally curated. Those are the types of lifestyle improvements that we'll get. The world struggles with making poor people middle class and rich, and that's great. But for the majority of the world, we're now in a different phase where people have more time on their hands. And it ties back to your question about COVID and work. I think COVID was really used as a focal point as power shifted from capital to labor. When employees talk about flexible work, maybe I'm a Luddite, but what I view is, what they're really saying is they want to work less. And that's actually okay. Listen, we all used to work 7 days a week, sun up to sun down. Religion made us go to 6 days a week, sun up and sun down. We eventually, in the US in the 1830s, started implementing a 5.5 and then a 5-day work week and a 10-hour and now an 8-hour work week. We're on the cusp of something much lower than 8 hours, 5 days a week. That's really what technology's empowering.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting.
No one wants
Well
to
said.
admit it.
Well
no
said.
one wants to admit it, but that's what's happening.
I think you're onto something, but in my mind, the way I look at it is we're moving from, we're in a proof of concept, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality. Even though there's, hundreds of millions of people that are using ChatGPT today, it's still in a proof of concept. When it moves to general AI, from generative AI to general AI, I think that's when we're going to start to see some of these transformative movements, across societies around the world, where, our entire day-to-day environment is going to change.
The thing I'd add is, yes, people are going to benefit from this if used appropriately. I look at this as you're going to get the consumer experience you get, be it on your iPhone or Android, in workflows and systems, because you're going to be able to use this technology and harness it towards data sets and complexity that's been built up through IT years and years and years.
Yeah, no, it's funny. We sat with a bunch of lawyers yesterday, and they were talking about how discovery is going to be real fun with AI, right? And I used to bring in bushel baskets of information that you had a bunch of analysts having to go through, and it's now in 20 seconds they can go through all the data, and then it will parse data in a way that we haven't really even thought about. Let's before I get to questions from the audience, what I'd like to do is let's think about what's going on geopolitically in the world right now, and I think all of your businesses have some exposure to, whether it be Russia or China. As a former CEO, I think one of the great things when we had Chinese vendors is we always had Huawei, that we could always bid against everybody else to make sure that we got the American vendors down, and so there has been a fundamental shift in terms of how we operate. China is seen as sort of a state that we have to be very, very careful about. Submarine cables aren't going there. Many people in this room have been affected by cable assets not going there. Many of us used equipment for many, many years that came from those vendors, and it actually, or if we didn't use the equipment, it created a very competitive environment for us to buy equipment, over the past. What do you think, as you guys see it on the ground? I mean, are we in for a long-term sort of winter with the geopolitics, or do we think this is sort of a short storm and we'll get out of it and we'll get back to some more of a static global environment, which we were in for probably the last 15 years? Maybe I start with you, Andy, because obviously you're across the globe. And
I think the two things that come to mind for digital and me personally operating across 6 continents and 50 plus metropolitan areas are, one, the landscape of risk is just so much a wider aperture, and the tail risk is so much larger. I mean, not just the US going for an election, but I think some number like 50% of the world is going towards an election in the same year. And the outcomes could be very hyperbolic. And I'd lay that against, at least for our industry, the capital intensity has just gotten to just extraordinary amounts. Single 100 megawatt builds at $1 billion. And we just went through a 2023 and part of 2022 where the Fed basically just reset the risk-free rate overnight, right? And that stilted capital markets, that had a massive impact. And we were fortunate to fight our way through that, and we had the benefit of this capital rotation moving towards digital infrastructure, moving towards data centers, and leaving legacy asset classes. But I just look back at, you could have a lot of things that could just go wrong in the next 12 months, be it elections, geopoliticals, wars, in a very capital-intensive world, that all the blessings of this great demand and all the hard work we could do on the revenue side could get eviscerated through our balance sheets and the like.
No, I think it's, not that felt good hearing that, but no, it's important that because I think we are sort of in a space like that. I mean, what would Steve
Bill, I actually think that you asked, is it a short-term, long-term? Personally, just everything I read and all the people that we talk to on a regular basis, I think deglobalization is real. And I think with what's going on in Russia, what's going on in China, what's going on around the world, I kind of feel like there's going to be a reindustrialization of North America. I think you're going to see, well, look what's going on with the plants and the fabs and the rebuilding going on. Now that's driven by geopolitical. I think it's going to create opportunity for all of us. And I think the conversation here is super interesting about, I love listening to Dave because he sees the future as well as anybody in our industry. But, the part I get excited about is I think the compute required for AI is going to be 2 to 3 times what it took to put cloud out there the last 15 years. I think the distribution models required to put it on the manufacturing floor, put it at the airports, put it in our companies, is going to give us huge opportunity over the coming decade. And so I mean, you've hit a lot of big topics that are going on today. I think, the world's going to get greener, so wind, solar, batteries are going to become way more important going forward. Wouldn't shock me in the US if smaller nuclear, you and I talked about this, smaller nuclear plants become a reality to get the cleaner power. I think the world's deglobalizing now, and I think that's real. And I think everybody's digitizing nearly everything around them, which provides all of us huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think it's we're in a very interesting space. Randy, you seem like you're about ready to say something.
No, I was just going to go on. This is not going to be short term, and it's probably as much uncertainty as we've had. It factors more into some of the decision making more often. And if I look over the last 10 years of capital allocation, I absolutely agree. And you've hit the big 3, right? People, the planet,
yep.
And then in this case, customers or the technology that's coming. We've hit all 3 of these. But on the global uncertainty, you'd like to sit here and say the world's 2 largest economies have to find a way to sort this out. But there's this Taiwan cloud, right? That could be disruptive for decades to come, right? Depending on how that plays out. And I think it's just going to take a while. We've seen the pendulum swings being a little too great. I do agree with you though, Steve, in terms of the amount of infrastructure that's required. Cloud was something. Yeah. We are about to see something much bigger.
I mean, the only thing that could disrupt that is if, God forbid, the Middle East is probably as dangerous as it's ever been in our history.
Yeah.
And God forbid something crazy happens there, because I think we're about as dangerous a time as we've been in our history. Yeah. And that could change all this. Yeah. But let's hope that doesn't.
I think you're already seeing it, right? A lot of people in this room have been trying to build subsea cables around Africa and, through the various more dangerous parts of the region around Yemen and in these different areas. And I think for us in Europe, we have a very different perspective because we're within, 2-hour flight of either Russia or a 3-hour flight of Israel. And so when you're that close to the actual battle environments, it becomes very real. Yeah. And so, I believe that it is for the long term, that we're in what I would call geopolitical almost crisis. I think it becomes even more important that we continue to create global communication that enables the ability to drive some sort of balance across what I think the large populace wants, which is peace, and they want that ability to actually understand what's happening around the earth, not just within their environment. So I agree. I think everything is moving inward, and everybody's picking their flag as far as where they want to produce product, whether it's industrialization in the United States or it's moving to a more conservative environment with the elections that are coming up in France and Germany in particular. That's happening as well. Yep. And so I think as we go forward as a communications community, what we have to continue to try to drive is balance across all of it, whether it's severe weather It's, all of the 100-year events that all of us as CEOs have experienced. We've experienced more 100-year events in the last 3 years than the CEOs prior to us experienced in their entire career. So, and more is to come. It's not going to change. So we have to be able to navigate the uncertainty around these things.
Yeah. What I'd like to do, since we have 5 minutes left, are there questions from the audience? Is anyone?
Got one there in the middle, Bill. About halfway back.
4 rows
Over here
back,
as
yeah.
well.
There we go. All right.
Hi, my name is Marcos. Thank you for all of your time and sharing. In this scenario that you all described it very well, how do you see your companies growing? So how are you going to attract new people to join your companies? Are you looking for more of like global forces, subcontracts, or you're expanding your own offices, headquarters? How do you see that? Where it's going?
Is that, I think the question was attracting talent?
Yeah.
We touched a little bit on this. Let's take a digital. We're trying to get out of the game of just fighting for the same talent pools and broadening the base. And we're fortunate operating across a global platform where we can import talent from one market into another. We bring in folks from our teams in Africa into EMEA. And I think whether you're going geographically promoting talent movement or different talent pools, be it veterans or diversity, I think this is through the entire industry because it's grown so quickly. It's at the operational level, it's in the center of excellence or departments, and it's at the leadership ranks. Because our industry has just gotten so much more global, complex, and scaled, and all those facets need to be looking in different pockets for new talent.
Yeah, I'd say the global thing has helped, though, right? It's allowed us to get people, as you said, we can hire people in Asia, and we may send them up to work in EMEA for a while and really learn some interesting health and safety things, and then either bring it back to their environment, and it's become a bit more mobile. Ties a little bit into where do you want to work, when do you want to work. You're not even restricted on, I have an Indonesian employee can work on something almost anywhere. So it's created the tech that we've deployed. Most of this audience is built and deployed has allowed that to happen. So.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, as leaders, we need to realize that we need to mentor and develop people. Just as lawyers don't learn to practice law in law school, they mentor from a senior lawyer or an accountant. In our industry, virtually everyone who performs a job has learned that job on the job. So what we need to do is make sure that our systems are there, our mentorship programs are there, and people have very clear goals of what they're expected to do. And then you stand back and let them do it. That's really the best way to manage. Set the goals, establish the systems and processes, but then allow people to develop and learn on their own and become the people that will be sitting up here in a few years.
We hope so. Let me jump to, yes, one more question in the back. And there should be a microphone. There we go.
Hi, morning. I have a specific question related to India market. Since I see major of you guys have been either announced or a couple of facilities already live. So when you're coming to India market, do you see that the subsea systems and the terrestrial connectivity is up to the mark, or many work needs to be done specifically in this market? Thank you.
I think the question was, do we think, I think what I heard is it was, Andy and I are both announced a lot in India, right? It's a huge and growing market. I think between us, we have the two biggest partners in that market. So I think we know where we're at with the data center space, but I think the question was specifically, what's about the connectivity both in and out of India and through India. I think that was the nature of the
You're asking what are the new cables that are coming into India? Is that the question?
Yeah, is the capacity of the new cables and the terrestrial connectivity within the country sufficient to probably suffice the data center boom which is going to come?
There.
Well, those are two different questions.
Yeah,
But I think
so the data center boom is on its way. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
The connectivity is a work in progress, both terrestrially, and I think you're seeing India with a tremendous need for more kind of in and out of India, recognizing there's a tremendous amount of regulatory infrastructure that has to come into play there. Look, there's a big part of me that believes that 2030, if not 2030, 2040, will be India's decade. I really think when I look at what's there and what's happening and the rise of the middle class that they've talked about and the education of the populace and where AI can really have an impact on the tasks in every day, there's a huge opportunity. But I do think it's right. There is a tremendous need for more connectivity in and out of that market, and frankly, through that market.
And I really think it's a regulatory issue. While, India is the world's largest democracy, and it is a society governed by the rule of law, it ends up being a society where law became its own purpose, and the regulations are probably stifling some of the innovation and development. So I think, if India could streamline, whether it be subsea connectivity, terrestrial connectivity, building connectivity, each of these areas needs to have kind of a practical way to permit and license that's not nearly as burdensome as what's there today for India to really flourish.
Get rid of paper.
Well, sadly, we are at the end of our time. But I would like to, let's have a round of applause for our 5 CEOs. Thank you very much.